Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe. And today I'm very excited to have my friend Marian G, who has been walking the path of recovery since July 12th, 1987. With nearly 4 decades of sobriety, Marian's journey is marked by deep service, quiet strength, and a powerful commitment to carrying the message, especially through her favorite avenue, corrections service, or as they say in California, H&I, hospitals and institutions. Marian is the widow of David G., a man I deeply admired and loved. She is the proud bonus mom to 2 daughters and grandmother to 3, and she shares her days with Sugar, lovingly known as Suge Knight, a dog with his personality as bold as his name. Marian is the epitome of light in recovery, and when she's not in service, she finds joy in the great outdoors, camping, fishing, hiking, and embracing adventure whenever she can. Her story is one of love, healing, and tireless dedication to helping others find the freedom she's found. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. How are you doing today, Marian?
Good, Joe. You said it's a Cup of Joe show, so I brought my own Cup of Joe today. So thanks for having me.
I love that you did that. Everyone should be drinking coffee with Marian right now. Well, so tell me, what was it like growing up, Marian?
Woo! Well, I was a troubled child, but I was competitive. I remember learning how to read at 4 because my brother was in school reading, and I had a insatiable drive to beat him and to beat anybody else in my path. And I was just competitive, and I don't know where that came from. Neither of my parents were that way, but it was a drive that was in me. So I excelled. I did really well in school. I got in trouble a lot. I always had to have the last word. I like attention. If I can't get good attention, I go for bad attention. And I can't tell you how many parent-teacher conferences, even in kindergarten and first grade, because I am unruly. I don't like to follow the rules. I like my own rules. I used to call them, I'd play games with my dad and I'd say, well, that's Mariposa rules. That was my elementary school. He says, those aren't rules. I go, yes, they are, because I would make them up as I go. So most of my life, I made up rules as I went along, and it didn't serve me well in the long run, but I thought it served me well at that time in my life.
What, when was the first time you felt the effects of like alcohol or drugs or anything like that, Marian?
I don't remember my first drink. I don't know that I knew it was going to take such a prominent place in my life. I was 11. I remember the first time I had smoked a joint. It was right before my 12th birthday. And I look at kids today and they're babies, but I was drinking before then. And I liked the effect. I came from a household. It was kind of, I think my parents just lived in fear, and I'm unruly. And so they rolled with the belt. And so with my personality, I got a lot of belts. And then my brother was class president. My sister was on the homecoming court, and I'm not like either of them. And so I found alcohol that gave me a sense of feeling I was okay, because I just could never measure up to what either of them were. So I was probably 12. I remember drinking regularly. I have a journal from 7th grade that I'm like, I'm not doing well in school. I'm drinking all the time. Wonder if there's a connection. And that was in 7th grade. So long before I got sober.
I always think of, alcohol was like the great equalizer for me. Was there were there any how did you get introduced to it? Was there people in your family that were drinking? Was drinking kind of common in around you?
I grew up in the 70s. I was born in the 60s. So the 70s was just a party era. My parents didn't really drink. And, it's just neighborhood kids. And some of them were older. And so at that time, you could easily stand on the corner. I stole from my parents to buy myself booze. And, I was a young girl and I'd get a guy at the liquor store, buy us something to drink, and got it every single time. And I drank every single day. I drank every day of my high school life. And I just was having a good time with it. So.
Were there consequences? Did you suffer consequences back then in high school or anything like that?
Not in my early days. And even I was not a puker. I would not have been alcoholic had I been a puker. I maybe threw up 5 times my entire drinking career. I graduated high school a year early when I was a junior. I was smart. I just don't like to apply myself. I was always told you had potential. I didn't start really suffering the consequences until I got married at 19 to my first husband and divorced a couple years later. And I lived in Los Angeles at the time. I grew up in a small desert community, moved to LA. And then my girlfriends at work would go out on the weekends and they invited me. And I had my first experience with a nightclub, which aren't common now, but they were common back in the 80s.
Yeah, I don't think folks know that nightclub. This is so sad. We had the Teddy Bear Disco where I grew up, and that was like the first. It was a roller skating rink, but we considered it the nightclub where when I was a kid.
But I love the nightclub. I love the music, the men, the cigarettes. I loved everything. And it's funny because as a kid, my brother knew he wanted to be in politics from the day he was born. He watched the 1963 debate between Kennedy and Nixon. He's 4 or 5. He watched the whole thing. He loved it. My whole goal was it's the 60s, and we had a topless go-go club called the Go-Go at Dolphin a Go-Go. And I wanted to get a job there. And my dad says, well, if it's still there when you're of age, I give you my permission. And, I had no rhythm and not much of a body. So it ended the career. And I'd go to these clubs to dance and my legs are like stuck to the ground. I can move the top half, but my legs don't move. I like to say I'm like Elaine from Seinfeld. I don't have any rhythm, but I did it. Once I drank, I think I got all kinds.
We all got rhythm when we drank. At least we thought we did.
Right.
When did you first start noticing that maybe there was a problem, or did you?
Yeah. In my early 20s, things were starting to happen behind my drinking. I was a blackout drinker, like my last 3 years or more of my drinking. And I would wait for Saturday or Sunday mornings and say to my roommate, I'd wait to see what her temperature was. And then she'd say, I can't believe you did that. And I'm like, what? And then she'd tell me and I'd be humiliated. I'm like, oh my God. And I always had excuses why. Well, I didn't eat. But in the lie in my head saying, yes, you did. I only had 2 drinks, but my bar had 2 bars. So I'd get my Long Island iced tea. I go, I'm going to go mingle. I hit the other side down and get a new drink. And I come back and they think I'm still on my Long Island iced tea. And then they don't understand why they're picking me up off the ground in the club. And they've only had the same 2 or 3 iced teas and they're still standing. So I started having those moments, waking up, not remembering who I was with, how I got there, having to check my car. I sideswiped my car, coming into the garage, took out the whole side. I came to in an accident on the freeway, yelling at a guy. And he's like, lady, you hit me. I got arrested for drunk driving. I got pulled over another time and they let me go. So, there started to be consequences. My employer, I was 23. and they were sober people, and they talked to me about my drinking, and I was so offended. And they talked to me twice about my drinking, so I left my job. I got to meet one of them years later, and he, when I was 4 months sober, I saw him, and I go, hey, I have 4 months. He said, I knew there was something wrong with you. Well, it only took me a few more years, but yes.
I love the rationale, because that's kind of how insane we get. It's like, well, somebody's calling me out on my stuff. I may have an issue. I better leave my job.
I'm gonna get a new one.
Yes.
Yeah,
it made sense. What did it look like kind of at your lowest point, Marian?
Oof. Well, I've had a couple of them. So I got that DUI arrest, and I had a restricted license, and I had to go to a 12-step fellowship, and I had to go get counseling. But I was 23 years old, or 24. I don't have a problem with alcohol, and I didn't identify because things weren't that bad yet. But within a year, that roommate moved out, and she left me a note that said, "You scare me." And I was mad. And I was mad because the rent was due, not because my best friend moved out. And I continued to drink, and I drank myself out of my job. I no longer can pay my bills. I have money, but you had to write checks. So I don't have any hot water. So I stopped taking showers. I don't have electricity. So I had an extension cord thrown over the balcony that plugged in a stereo, a fan, and a lamp. I got maggots in my refrigerator and freezer because I don't have any power. I got 50 bags of garbage I'm picking the cigarette butts out of, and I'm okay. This is my only normal life. And, I got out of jail. I had a warrant on that DUI, and I got home and my belongings were gone. And a neighbor said my parents had been there. And what happened is I had an eviction notice, which I didn't know. And my parents break into my apartment and smell a rotting stench, and they think it's my dead body. And they're looking. And my dad had a heart attack that day because, they're walking in like, what's happening? And so when I get out of jail, I have to borrow, my car's impounded, and I have to borrow a car. And I explain why I'm living that way. Of course, it's nothing I've done. And I go back to that for a week. And then my parents made me move back to their house and try to get me help. But, and then a year later, I stayed sober for 90 days, but I got hooked up with a boyfriend, and, who can't stay sober, and it's okay. We're going to help one another. And he came home, and I said, if you're going, I'm going. And I spent another 8 months out, and it was even worse. The low part as a woman, today's July 11th. Tonight is the last night of my last drink, 38 years ago. And so the week before, I went to Mexico with the girls, and I know what happens. I drink tequila, and I'm dancing, but I come to, and I got a black eye, a fat lip, no underwear, parked in the desert. And when I drive back to the hotel, my girlfriends are gone. And I'm like, well, I couldn't have gone anywhere. I mean, I drove, so I sleep it off, and they weren't coming, So I came across the border, and they'd called my family and said I was crazy. But yet the next day when I make it back to LA, my head says you can have just 2 the next day. And I have 2. And then the next day I have 2. And then I'm drinking like it's ginger ale. And on July 11th, I'm on a blind date. And I'm like, that poor guy must have been really desperate. I got the perfect girl for you, Joe. I still got a black eye. And I meet him at a bar in Beverly Hills. And but I look across the room, and there's the man I've been waiting for my whole life. And I went home with that guy. And in the middle of doing the nasty, I got a moment of clarity, and I'm like, dude, I got to go. He's like, now? And I'm like, because that wasn't the first time that happened. But when you're a woman who lives like that, and that pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, and I can't do one more day. I can't look at myself. I can't drink like this. I don't know how to live without it. I don't know how to live with it. And I called the people I met the year before, and I told him I was in trouble. And so, I haven't had to have a drink then. That desperation became, it wasn't even my worst drunk. I mean, I had done that countless times with men, but it finally had to be the last one.
Thank God for the moment of clarity, I mean,
Right.
that's, we never know when it's going to come. So what were like the next steps, since that was, what did you do like next early on?
Well, I got engaged at 3 weeks of sobriety. So, what's new? I mean, my friend goes, man, you're like an airport, Marian. You got one in the air, one on the tarmac, and one in the hangar. And I'm like, that's true. Because I just got divorced. I had that boyfriend. I got a new one. And, I got engaged 3 weeks. I just joined a group of people that were showing me a new way of living. And it was odd. I don't live that way, but I don't have any friends. And that boyfriend that I met in rehab, even though got engaged, he's on the streets. And all I could imagine is him eating out of a dumpster. And I want to help him, but I couldn't. And I knew that if I tried to help him, I was going with him. And I knew that I couldn't even help myself. I was able to stay sober, and that man has been in and out of prison, and he currently lives on the streets of Los Angeles 38 years later. And I know it's just by the grace of God that, a willingness to try something different that allowed me to have the life that I have today. And I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful for that gift of desperation, God, whatever. I was willing to do whatever.
Well, that was like, you're kind of, I think, what does surrender mean to you, like in that kind of context?
Well, I still use that phrase today that I learned when I was new, surrender to win. When I'm struggling against something, I can't win. I didn't know what alcoholism was, even though I had been sent to rehab, even though the court sent me to a 12-step program, even though my bartender, my husband, my boyfriend, my employer, the cop, the judge, everybody told me I was alcoholic. I don't even know what it means. So unless I diagnose myself, I don't really have to apply a solution. So when I found out what the definition was, the physical allergy and the mental obsession, the allergy that I'm only going to have 2 drinks with you after work, Joe, and then I'm still there at 1:45 when they're closing the bars in California. And then I'm not going to drink again because self-knowledge sobered me for a bit. Fear sobered me for a bit. Cocksuredness sobered me for a bit. But then the idea would come, as long as you don't drink tequila, just go eat first. Just don't go with Joe, because when you party with Joe, all things happen. And I believed that lie every time. And it was like the first time that I'm like, because I was 26, I didn't want to be an alcoholic. I'm like, I can't ever drink again. My life expectancy at that time was 76. That's 50 years. It's impossible. But, when I learned the grave nature of what I've got and that I was chronic and hopeless, I knew I had to find a solution. It had closed all avenues of exit for me to get out, thinking I could drink at any time in my future.
I love how you put that, all avenues of exit. That's like, yeah, I get that. So was there anyone, or just was it a group of people who played a key role in keeping you there, maybe when you didn't want to be there?
No, I always wanted to be there, which was an amazing thing. I'm not a joiner. I'm not a people person. Like I said, I was desperate. I got engaged at 3 weeks, so I had somebody to hang out with. I don't know. There were old men and women who I met who were like mean to me. And they would tell me things. Well, when I came the year before, people would tell me it's the first drink that gets you drunk. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's like the fifth. I didn't understand that. And so they would tell me things about, you need to get some help, Marian. Why don't you call somebody? Why don't you take some action? Why don't you do something different? And I was so mean to these people, but yet in hindsight, they saved my life. And at the time, I didn't know that was happening. I just thought they were jerks. And then I followed this lady around. She did a lot of service work. And I don't have anything else to do. I worked in LA and I drove to Lancaster every day and stayed there. And I'd go back to work in LA. So she did service work in treatment and jails and prisons. And so I followed her, and I took the juvenile boys at a place called Camp Scudder, 15, 16, and 17-year-old kids. And that's when some changes started happening, because I am like utterly miserable. I'm not drinking, but nothing really has changed much in my life. But when I would meet those kids on that Monday for an hour and a half, I thought about somebody other than myself. And sometimes I competed with Monday Night Football, a basketball pickup game, and a movie. But if I had 7 kids who were in that room, it changed everything. And I liked the way it made me feel. And I got home, and the next day I'm back to my cranky self. So I took the boys a second time, and then I took a couple of treatment centers and in a prison. I had 6 a month because it was the only time I felt good. And it just changed everything about my life. I'm probably, I'll tell you, I'm the most selfish and self-centered person I've ever met. And that stuff changed every asset. It allowed me to become a servant. And I never knew that was going to happen. And I'm so grateful that it did.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That, I was just thinking, like 1987, that was okay. That was the year I graduated high school, and I'm not saying anything, but that was. And so it's a great year for me in that way. But was there like a stigma back then? You being so young, getting sober, was there a stigma to that?
Not that I knew of. No, there were a couple of older people, and I'd heard it, but nobody ever said it to me. Like I drank more than you spilled, or whatever that saying is. No, I think people knew I came in pretty rough, and I looked rough, and my voice was, I was cut off from people. And I think they knew. What I liked about it, and I've talked about it, is, I went to a place that low bottom drunks go to, and there's a line that talks about when we see a man sinking into the mire of alcoholism, we render first aid. And those people knew how to apply first aid. They saw me bleeding out. They applied a tourniquet and sent me in the direction of somebody who could help me. And, I'm so grateful. And I just, as much as I hated the lady who told me to do certain things, I did them anyway. Like I said, I don't know how to socialize without alcohol. And she used to go make me welcome people. And I'm like, I don't even like Joe. She goes, I didn't ask you to have Joe over for a barbecue, Marian. I'm like, I was 5 years sober with my friend. And she goes, I wish I could do that. I said, I don't want to do that. Vicky makes me. So now it's a part of who I am. But even at that 5 years, I was like, just really, with people. I just didn't know I didn't grow up with a close-knit family. I grew up feeling separated my whole life. Alcohol gave me a social lubricant. And then when you take it away, I still don't know how to have a social relationship with people. So it was difficult.
And it's hard to imagine knowing you now that, because like you're the first one of the people I think of, like if somebody new comes into a room you're the first one to go, hey, that's a new person. Go talk to them. I'm like, I don't like people. I don't like people.
I don't care. Do it anyway.
You don't care. Do it anyway.
I met some girl. I was speaking somewhere and on a panel, and she goes, "Oh, hey, Marian." I go, "Oh, have we met?" She goes, "Yeah, 4 years ago. You made me sit with you." It was my first time. She avoided me after that, but she's still around today. So I'm like,
it works.
I didn't remember her, but she certainly remembered me. So
that's a big deal. That's a big deal. How what were some of the biggest lessons you learned early on in recovery? Were there?
Well, I used to have stickers. I drove 2 hours each way to my job, and then I had stickers on my computer, my steering wheel, and my mirror at home that says, "I'm responsible. I'm not responsible," because I assume responsibility for things that aren't mine, and then I'm dropping the ball on things that I am. So I would always have to weigh responsible, not responsible. One of the biggest things, I had this little Hyundai Excel. My dad had to help co-sign for this thing. And I worked in LA. It was a 2-hour commute at least each way. And I finally found a carpool girl, and I come back and my car's missing. And that boyfriend, husband at the time, she takes me home and he's like, "Where's the car?" I'm like, "I thought you had it." And so I have to call the police, and he goes, "Well, maybe God's trying to teach you some acceptance." I'm like, "Well, how much does he expect me to take?" And I stormed down the hall and I threw myself on the bed like I always do, drama. And so a few days later, the sheriff's department called, got my car back. They'd stole the stereo, broke off the antenna, put holes in the carpet from cigarettes. So I get that car back, and the girl I was driving with moved. So it was just me, and I don't have a radio in my car. And my husband says, "You should get a radio." I don't want a radio. But, a 2-hour commute when you're pretty new, your head is like going constantly. And I'm like, it was 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours on the way home. And then, so one day my head is just screaming. And I'm like, I go, "Well, what did you used to do?" "Well, you used to drink." "Well, what do you do now?" "Pray." But I'm not a kind of gal that can pray 4 or 5 hours a day. It's just not who I am. So I decided that I was going to sing. Well, the only songs I know are Christmas carols. So in July, it's, "Oh, holy night, the stars are brightly shining." So I didn't get a thing for a year and a half in that car. And I tell people that God stole my car because it was an opportunity for me to grow in a relationship with God. Because there was no distraction with a radio or music or anything else. It was just me and God in that car. And, I'm really grateful for the people who stole my car because it changed my relationship with God, because it forced me in that time to be still and know that I'm God. I just had to really invest in that.
Yeah. On a side note, my bonus daughter's car just got stolen.
Oh.
I'm going to share that message of hope with her.
Is it a Nissan?
It's a Hyundai. It was It was a Hyundai. She did get it.
My friend from Texas emailed. He goes, "You drive a Nissan?" I'm like, "No, why?" He goes, "It's the number one stolen car in Knoxville." And I'm like, "No."
Yeah, she's actually in Chicago, and it's a Hyundai. And apparently in Chicago, the number one stolen car is Hyundai.
Whoa,
so
there you go. There you go.
So how has your view of addiction changed since you've been in recovery? I mean, it's been quite a while, but right. Has your view changed on it?
Yes. I got sober sitting in the rooms of, sitting still, being with other people. Even though my parents threw me into a rehab the year before, 1986, it took the heat off of me. It took away that desperation. And I have a friend, he lives in Vegas. And Frank last time I when he still lived in California before he moved. Before I moved, I guess he moved. He had been through 17 different rehabs. And I'm like, Frank, they tell you all the same thing. And then because California, they're 90 days. So he'd extend them for 4 months and then go out for a couple of months and then come back and do another 4 months. And so when I saw him in Vegas, and, he's sober now, and I asked him how many rehabs he went to, and he said probably 40, and it was all on the taxpayer. I just think that we make it so easy now for people. Just come back. And then in the course of that, I've watched so many people die because they always think they can come back, and they can't always come back. And it's heartbreaking. And I'll just go here. I'll just do this. And yet they don't do the one thing that's going to save their life. And they think that going to treatment is going to be the answer for them. And it never has been. And so, I have a problem with that. And then, I know people today that, they use, I guess it's called Suboxone or whatever. And so then they get them put on that. And then that's a whole nother thing that has to be addressed. And some of them don't. And, I don't know. I think this is we work it out on a spiritual as well as altruistic plane. And I think using an outside thing to try to assist is not beneficial to people. I'm kind of old school, and I know people don't like that today, but that's really when you watch people year after year just die and can't get it, and people rub their back. It's okay, keep coming back. No, you're going to die. And one of my friends, she goes, oh, you're so cruel, when she was new. I go, well, watch it for a few years. And she has. And she's like, this is heartbreaking. And I said, it is. So.
I think that you are just very consistent. And I appreciate that about you, and I don't think there's all kinds of views on things. And you've earned the right to stand where you stand. You've walked the walk, and you've helped a lot of people. And so I like your old schoolness, Marian.
And then moving here to the South with my California, go get them. So they're like, I'm terse. I mean, I even had that when I had a career, my review. They're like, you're really good, but you're terse. I'm like, terse. So I had to send this email out to everybody. I left that sucker open all day. I floured it up. I cut it down. I poofed it up. At the end of the day, I'm like, that is stunning. I send it off, and a partner comes in. She goes, that was so beautiful, except that last line, terse. I'm like, really? Oh, my God. And so, I still have that here, and people in the South find it rude, but it's just the way it wasn't. I worked for lawyers. At the time, they charged $800 an hour 20 some years ago. So I got to be terse. They don't want to hear me talking. 5 words or less.
It's the recovery word of the day is terse, people. Just so you all
T-E-R-S-E, short.
Short. So.
And that was how I'm long-winded today, though.
That's right. Yeah. So what are some of the best things sobriety brought into your life?
Forgiveness. I grew up in a home where, like I said, if I can't get good attention, I get bad attention. My brother was class president, my sister's homecoming. I do anything to get my parents' attention, and that includes getting beat with the belt. And so I grew up in a pretty harsh environment. And, I found a way of finding a level of forgiveness that I knew was not possible. And so when I moved my parents out here when my dad was 88, my mom was 86, and we were having a 90th birthday party for my father. And my nephew came out a week early, and it was during COVID. So of course, Tennessee, restaurants are open, the movie theater. So we went and did everything, and I took him hiking. He stayed at the house with David and I bring him to my parents. And he goes, "Can I ask you something, Auntie?" And I said, "Sure." He goes, "I've heard stories about how you were raised." I go, "Yeah, it was pretty rough." He goes, "Yeah, but you treat your parents really well. How is that possible?" He got this. And I said, the best thing I've gotten other than sobriety is the ability to have forgiveness. I said, I've never forgotten what happened, but it holds no more sway in my life. And, that was probably one of the best things that I've been able to have. And then when my father passed, my mother wanted us all to speak. And I have some friends here, and one of my friends always brings it up. He said it was so interesting how my brother shared about my father, who never forgave him, and my sister, who only had a couple of years with my dad. And then I had this 35-year history of fun and a relationship with my father and intimate things that they all missed out on. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so lucky. So lucky. So.
And I remember I was actually there. Katie and I were there. I remember it was beautiful how you talked about your father. It really was. It was very moving. And what are some other things that happened, positive, good? I know there's a lot, but
I remember when I read something when I was new, and that says I could become happily and usefully whole. And I thought, oh, that's a pretty bold statement. And I didn't even know what it meant, but I knew I wasn't happily nor usefully whole. And over a period of time that happened. And you knew my husband, David, and we broke up one time during our dating years. And I cried for like a week. And then I'm like, wait a minute. You were good before you met him, and you're going to be just fine. And immediately I stopped crying, because though he enhanced my life, he didn't make my life. And being able to know who I am as a person, as a woman, at that time as a wife, as a stepmother, as a grandmother, as a friend, as a daughter, I have all of those things in my life that I've been happily and usefully whole in. And that's an amazing thing to be able to recognize that in my own life, when my whole life was avoiding anything that was discomforting, that brought discomfort in my life. So.
Well, and that, I that happily and usefully whole, like that is, I'm striving for something like that. I am not there yet. But the other thing you said, I think, is like, who you are, and that is, I can remember just bawling, drunk, calling my brother, like, I don't know who I am. Like literally, like, I was like, I don't think, and today I think, we are given that through, recovery programs and recovery, where I know, maybe not 100% who I am, but I know for me, I'm a child of God. Right. That's it. And that's okay. Right. That's good for me,
And I know where I fall short. And one time David asked me what my worst defect was, and I told him, and then he used it against me, which made me mad. And I told him he was a dirty fighter. But I also know assets that I have. And so one time, David, I swear what he said was, "You are the kindest person I've ever met." And I'm like, wow, well, thank you. And I'm like marinated in that, because I know it's not true. So, it says we don't fool ourselves about values. And I know, I'm like, that's now starting to eat my lunch. So like 3 days later, I go, that was really a huge compliment you gave me. And I was kind of surprised. He goes, "What?" I said, "You said I was the nicest person you'd ever met." He goes, "Oh, I didn't say that." I go, "No." He goes, "No." I said, "You're the kindest person I've ever met." And there's a difference. Because nice is like, "Hey, Joe." Yeah. Friendly. That's not me. And I know that about myself. But kind, he says, "I don't know anybody more than you who will be willing to help anybody who needs it." He said, "Of all the people that I know, you are always the first one to say, I can help." And I looked at him and I thought about it, and I go, I can live with that. So that's a good asset. Being friendly is not necessarily my best asset. Like I said, it struggled as a kid growing up with that. And then, after getting sober, not having the alcohol. So I just don't have that friendly, come see me. I don't know what it is. Nobody thinks I'm mean that that my friends, but I'm also not known as super nice either. I don't know. So it's an offset. And I have all these friends, women friends that are older, that I've aspired to be. And it's all interesting that they all are super nice people. And I think inside I want to strive to be like them. So if I want to strive to be like them, I have to have examples of that in my life. So I'm way nicer than I used to be, but I still have a long way.
I think you're really kind.
Right. You didn't say nice.
That's a cool thing. Yeah, didn't say nice.
No, you did not. I know my values here.
I've seen the rap. No, I'm just kidding.
You have not.
I know I haven't. That's what I said. I'm joking. Totally joking.
You might have seen the eyes that can give the eye.
I have seen the eye, and it's intimidating, people. I know you can't see Marian like I can, but yeah, she's. If for people in Tennessee, they'll remember Pat Summit, and when she was a head coach of Tennessee's women's basketball forever, legendary coach. Marian has a very similar eye that Coach Summit had.
Well, my first woman who helped me told me, she said, she talked to me about the best thing I can be is kind and respectful. I'm like, no, I don't know that she's telling me I'm rude and disrespectful. But she said, if you don't have anything nice to say, you shouldn't say anything at all. Well, now I can't even talk because I'm like, so I called her. I said, if this is what it means to be nice and respectful, I don't like it. She says, why? I said, I feel like everyone's walking on me. She's like, what's happening? And I told her, she goes, silly, they are walking on you. I go, well, what do I do? She said, say something. I said, you told me to keep my mouth shut. She goes, well, now it's time to find a balance, right? She had asked me to pray for tact and communication skills because I had none. And so things started to change by little simple directions like that. And so I don't try to say mean things to people anymore. I keep my personal stuff like that, separate. I don't gossip. I think that's the cruelest thing I could ever do to another person. And, so I've learned a lot. I got a long way to go, Joe, but I've learned a lot.
You're not alone.
I was hoping before my husband passed that he would tell me I was the nicest person he had ever met, but he did not.
Yeah. Well, I will say it. I think you're a very nice person. How about that, Marian?
I got to give you a hug, and I don't hug men.
I know, and I love that.
Next time I see you.
I don't think you give yourself enough credit for that. I think you are, you are kind and nice, and you do look out for people. And I meant when I said when you are the type of person that if you see somebody or newcomer and you will point people in a direction and say that person needs help, go help them. If you can't do it yourself, or if it's a male or so, we're hard on ourselves. My old sponsor used to say, man, put the stick away. I forget to put the stick away. Yeah. Sometimes.
David knew that about me more. Before he passed, he'd say, Marian, there's nobody harder on you than you. So it's true.
Well, that kind of brings me to how have you walked through some of the tough times in sobriety and continue to walk through?
Well, my husband and I lost all 4 of our parents in an 8-month period. We get a call that my husband's father was passing away in California, and my dad was not doing well here. And I said, David, I don't think I can go. I don't think my dad's going to make it. So he flew and was with his dad when he passed. And a week later, my dad passed. And so, I took care of all that stuff here. And then we flew and buried his dad and came back and buried mine. And I had to assume responsibility of some stuff for my mother. And then 5 months later, David's mother passed. David's dad had a stroke 3 years before, and his mother developed Alzheimer's. And so the night that David's mother passed, my mother ended up in the hospital, and I'm like, oh, if she dies in a week, I'm going to be mad. But my mother held out for 3 months. And so we went back to California and buried her and came back for my mother. And the hard part was I had to make those end of life decisions. Like my dad, I walk in and he's crying and he's like, why can't I just die? He was 90. He'd been fighting for a year. And I walked out and I told them, I go, you're not sending him back to the hospital. I know he's developing pneumonia. No more. And, that's a burden that you got to carry. But my parents made me the trustee of their trust to it's funny because my brother was a state elected official in California and my sister was an executive in a Fortune 500 company. And then there's me, multiple marriages, couple trips to jail, high school graduate. And they knew I would do the right thing. And then I had to do the same with my mother. And David and I always had a cup of coffee at the end of the day. He'd get home at 3:45 and I'd be meeting with 2 cups of coffee. And we always visited to just connect. And it was like this dark pall, like 3 days after my mother's passing. And I looked at him and I'm like, I feel like a serial killer. I had to find some humor in the darkness. And he's looking at me. He goes, well, all of our friends are getting to be that age, their parents. If they need help, I'm going to say, call Marian, she'll take care of it. It was just that humor and such darkness. And I knew that if I didn't, and then, I took care of my parents' estate and David was getting ready to retire April Fool's Day of 2024. But the joke was on us. A week after he turned 60, he was diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer that had metastasized. And, the first 2 months, I tell people that I had this shivering, quivering on the inside of my body. And I know it was fear. I'm driven by fear. And then one day I'm driving. I got my dog groomed on a Sunday and I'm driving home. And this voice says, Marian, you need to surrender this. And I felt this warmth from the top of my head. I could feel it move all the way through my body. And there was perfect peace in the car. And I sat at the car at the light and I'm like, do I need to surrender David? No, Marian, just yourself. Because how could I surrender my husband? And after that, I went on that and I didn't realize that I've never felt myself as a person who has defied God. Yet I knew then that this was God's will. And by my resistance to what was happening was a sense of defiance. And I was able then to just focus on being present for my husband. And, it was a brutal 5 months. He never complained. When he made that decision, you were there the day after, putting in our new fence. And he'd done chemo on Wednesday. We were trying a new round. And on Friday, we're outside having coffee. And he says, I want to keep fighting, but I have nothing left in me. And I said, I know. And he was worried that he was going to be a disappointment to people. I said, baby, you've been a warrior. So, and remarkably, this has been the hardest year of my life. Not hardest staying sober, just hardest. I didn't know how to grieve. As a kid, I drank my way through. And, but I went to a grief counseling group. And then I had a friend, we got sober a couple weeks apart, and she lost her only child when we were maybe 20 years sober. And they have a place in Arizona, and she got a call that her son was dying. She goes, I'll be there in 7 hours. They said, he doesn't have 7 hours. And she called us all and we met at the house and, we suited up and showed up for her. But I have no idea the grief she must have felt because I've never been in her shoes. Losing my parents or my grandparents, my first friend was completely different than losing a spouse. And I was doing my homework from this grief group. It's a program that works if you work it. I'm like, oh, I can do this. And the next day she sent a text, and I called her when I told her I was so sorry what I had done to her. And she just started to cry. She said, thank you for acknowledging it, because it was her husband's stepson. He didn't even know how to help her. She says, I would just stand in my shower and cry and scream. And just nobody acknowledged that. And I don't think because I knew how to acknowledge that. So David's coming up on August 5th. I've been weepy the last couple of weeks. Walking through the grocery store or Walmart, I just burst into tears, driving, wiping my tears. And I thought that I should probably, when it first happened, keep a stiff upper lip and show everybody how strong I am. And then I'm like, I'm doing a disservice to me and the next woman who's going to lose her husband. Well, Marian had a stiff upper lip. I should have that. And that's not true. It's been the hardest year of my life. And but I remember when I was new, I read something and I said to Vicky, I go, what does this mean? We joyously deal with the realities of life. And she said, because we're sober, we can get through anything. And I thought, that's ridiculous. And I'm joyously dealing with the realities of life. And that's because I'm sober. Hasn't been easy. But I'm, I just got to keep moving forward. I get out every day. I do some sort of service every day. I have to. Otherwise, it could be so consuming, just like with my mother and calling myself a serial killer. I had to find some kind of humor in that. So I tried to do that now.
I think you're a warrior. I love that word. I think you're a warrior, honestly. And thank you for sharing. David was a special person, and he had a special wife. And
I felt so lucky that he picked me. He's so different. He's so laid back, and I'm like, and we just worked, and it's funny because his daughter. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No. I was just thinking. I was just thinking. Our friend Hunter always says every bill needs a Bob. I always thought of you and David that way. But like right? The personalities, that's you guys were each other's yin to yang. That's why it worked. We each had different assets that we could bring to the relationship, and like our youngest. His youngest daughter once said, "Oh, I want to be like you," which I found very lovely. And then she had said, she's really succeeded well in life. And she had said, she goes, let's face it, my mother never had any ambition and my father never had any until he met you. But David's like, let's live for the moment. And I'm like, no, we got to think long term. And so the two of us meshing that together with his freedom to his joy of living just now and me being able to think, well, we got to think out 10, 20 years. And then they meshed together. And so it provided us with a really solid foundation and a solid financial life and all the things we did. And so I'm really grateful that, and he'd be funny because there's somebody that they're not allowed to be at our house and it's a relative and they were coming to town and I'm like, no, absolutely not. And I do like a 10-minute rant and he just sits there and he doesn't even say anything when I'm done. And then he knows that I'm going to run this quickly through. And then after about 5 minutes of silence, I go, look, if they need to stay here, I'd be happy to have them here. And he knows I'm going to process it. I'm just more reactionary in the beginning. And then I can and he's just like, I'm going to just wait for her to figure this out. So I like that about him because he let me be me and he could be him. And, that was probably one of the greatest gifts is that we allowed each other to be who we were without trying to change the other person. And yeah, he was a great guy. That's huge. That's huge. You remind me, I think that's probably, Katie and I have that type. She is the no person. Her first reaction is always no, but and maybe I got this from David. I'm wondering now, like, one of those subconscious things of the pause, of, I know if I just pause, she will eventually think it through, like you said, and, do it my way. No, I'm just kidding. That's not true all the time. But, think it, but yes, I could relate so much.
Well, that's also, one of the gifts I learned was compromise. I've always wanted things my way all the time. And so being in a marriage, I don't get to have my way all the time. And so I have to I learned, it was interesting when I had met David, I tried to put his needs on the same level as my own. Like, I always am up here and then you got to be way down here. And so I would, like, when we had the business and he was cold, he's wet, it's raining. And so what would I like? So I drew him a hot bath and lit some candles, and he gets out of his wet clothes. And I'm like, I drew you a bath because that's what I would want when you're soaked to the bone. And, it wasn't convenient for me, but I tried always to push. I mean, I know that people think I'm like, really, but I think our relationship, what people didn't see was how we lived together and loved together. And he always thought about me. And so, except the one time he got up and got a cup of coffee in the morning, came back to bed with a cup for him and not one for me. I said, that is the most selfish act I've ever witnessed from you. And I got up and got my own. He never did it again. I never said anything else after that. So I let him sit in it. But yes, always try to put the other person on the same level and the same needs as our own. So I miss him every day. 28 years.
Yeah. Wow. It was 28 years. And he really was just a wonderful, he lived recovery, and he showed how to do it, and I think you do the same, honestly. I think that's another thing that you two, you have your individual recovery but it's so representative of what folks need to do if they want to do it right, if they want to, walk this way of life. You are certainly a great example of that. What would you say to someone who may be listening out there who feels like, maybe feels hopeless, in alcoholism or addiction?
Good. I love when it says, the more hopeless you feel, the better. Right. And then if you have somebody explain what you have to you, because self-knowledge, that you get in rehab or something isn't enough. But when I got it from my head to my heart, what was wrong with me, then I could apply a solution. It's like one time David said, I think I have an ear, my ear hurts. He goes, you have an earache. I said, no, I don't. Well, I suffered for like 4 days because I'm going to prove him wrong. And I go get antibiotics and the doctor gives me, 10 days worth. I take 2 the first day, and by day 3, I feel good. And I save the rest of the antibiotics for the next time. And then it comes roaring back. And then I take those and it doesn't. And I go back to my doctor. He goes, well, did you take them? I go, yeah. He goes, all of them? I go, well, sort of. And, and I wonder why it came roaring back. And, look for a different alternative. Be willing, This is on a foundation of complete willingness. Right, complete. And I've not resisted anything that anybody's asked me to do. I thought it might be stupid, but I did it. And turns out they were right. So if you're hopeless, you feel that way, good, because there is a solution. The word hopeless means without solution, yet there is a solution.
Well, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't?
Just, I think, I volunteer in the prison system. I've watched remarkable things happen. And I've always served men's prison just because where I've lived, they've only been men's prison. And there's a pretty good story that recently happened. We had a guy, I have like 3 DUI homicides on this prison yard. And we were reading something and, the men share. And then the guy who'd he came in early and he sat next to me and he said he just got back from the compound. And I said, oh, some shenanigans. He's like, he's trying to, I go, come on. He goes, all right, well, I knew and I did it. And so we read this and it's resonating with him. And at the end, he burst into tears and he is sobbing. And he's talking about he killed a 92-year-old man while drunk and injured his 89-year-old wife. And he said, and I still didn't stop drinking. And he says, I drank for 9 months until they indicted me and put the ankle bracelet on me. And he made his lawyers fight it, even though he was guilty and he'd done it. And he's just crying. All the guys, I have 12 men that come to this every Wednesday. They're crying. And he's just talking about, what happened. And so he doesn't drink for the 18 months while he's waiting for trial. And so he now has to turn himself in on a Monday. And on Friday, he makes plans with his children who are newborn, 4 and 6, to spend the weekend with him before he turns himself in and comes to prison. He said, but I picked up a drink prior to the important event. It couldn't be met. He said on Friday, he said, screw it. And he got a bottle and he drank all weekend and he spent no time with his children. And he's just sobbing. And he came to prison and he drank and he knew we were there every week, but he would walk by and he said, and my wife had to sell the house. He's an accountant. The wife had to sell the house to pay the family. And he said, now my wife and children are homeless. And my wife's divorcing me. And he said all of it was for one drink. And so during his sharing, some of the other men are like, me too. I'm in here for that too, letting him know. And afterwards, when we prayed out, every single man in that room walked over to him and put their arms around him and hugged him. Said, you're going to be okay. And what happens here stays in here. And I just got to witness this miracle of this beautiful fellowship that has developed at the prison amongst these men. Embrace this man who is devastated by what's happened in his life. And, he still comes every week. He sits next to me because I don't touch the inmates, but he was crying so hard. I'm like rubbing his back, like, it's okay. Let him know. And just watching this, I just got to stand on the sidelines while I watched all those men approach him. And I just saw the fellowship alive and well. And it was so beautiful. So, yeah, if you've never done service, especially in a correctional facility, there is nothing like it. There is nothing like it. And I've done it for 37, almost 38 years now. And I would not live my life without it, ever. So do it.
Do it.
You should do it, Joe.
But do it.
I'm going to give you a clearance.
I'm going to be honest. I've always kind of shied away from it. And I think I need to do it, So I'm going to get a clearance form. I will do that. I will do that.
Prison is better than jail. Jail always has the hierarchy and the insanity that goes with a prison. I got an inmate out now who did 7 years with us, and he's out. And so it's like watching that happen and somebody's life transforms. There's a couple of them here in Knoxville and that I've gotten to see, and they're like, hey, because I was there. And one of the things I've learned is about consistency. When you said I'm consistent that I show up there every week. And I watched that with a young kid in California, and I spent 7 years with him. And then he got shipped out for a couple of years to a fire camp, and it's easy peasy in fire camp. And his last year, right before we moved to Tennessee, Frankie's on the yard. I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, it's my last year and I wanted to spend it with you guys. Because you know what? His mother was a drunk who only saw him one time in all those years. But we showed up every week for him. And, it's that consistency for them and for me. They've saved my life. They have no idea, especially this past year.
Well, you are amazing. You are amazing, Marian. And but I cannot let you go without doing our rapid fire questions. No pressure. But are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. What is your favorite recovery slogan?
God is everything or else he is nothing. He either is or he isn't. What do you choose?
What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
It's all the same thing.
What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
Ooh. I don't think it's a superpower, but when Bob Smith talked about it, it's a sense of duty. It's a joy. Yeah, I found that. And if it's a superpower, I'm not aware of it. It's just that those people who applied the tourniquet to me, I feel obligated to apply the tourniquet to them.
If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
Everything's going to be okay.
What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
The Cure. Disintegration. Favorite album all time. Yes. It's so dark, but
nice.
It's beautiful for me.
If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
I don't have one. I take it exactly how it is. And, no wishes. I once told David the story when I was a kid. You talk about, finding the genie bottle on the beach. I don't know if you guys did this. I'm a lot older. And you rub the bottle and out pops the genie, grants you 3 wishes. And it's like, what do you want? And I said, Donny Osmond is my boyfriend, $1 million and 1 million more wishes, which is men, money, and more. And that's what my life had always been. And then when we look at that serenity prayer, God brought me for courage, wisdom, serenity, courage, and wisdom. And that's what we wish for now. So I don't wish for anything. I've been overpaid for what I've been given.
What step do you love the most?
Ooh, each of them have been so different. 4 helped me to see what was wrong with me. 5, every time I do it with somebody that I gonna find a solution to what's wrong with me. 2, being able to process through the prejudice and the ideas that I had about God that kept me from establishing a relationship that was going to benefit me for the rest of my life. 1, being able to ask, had enough humility, ask for help. I don't know. 12, I do service. I don't know. All of them have something special. So there's no one that I would choose over any of the other. They all go hand in hand.
Well, then I know your answer to this one, but what step do you love the least?
The least? Probably none, other than, character defects. When my sponsor said, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Entirely ready?" No, not really. And it's not the least. It's the one that is the hardest one to practice because I fall short in so many areas. And it takes a lot of effort to practice character assets over my character defects. And sometimes it's like, it's a chore. I'm a chore.
In a good way.
Yeah.
What is one of your favorite movies?
The only movie I've ever bought is Spaceballs. You would never think that about me, would you?
You got me on that one.
I love that movie. It's the only movie I've ever purchased in my life, and I still have it on VHS. I don't even have a VHS, but yeah, I'm never going to get rid of it. Mm-hmm.
I think out of all the things I've learned today, that was definitely maybe top 3. That's top 3. All right. And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You know, David and I were so different when we'd pray. He was much more, dear Heavenly Father. I'm like, hey, God, you know, and it would be like, oh, that's how you pray. So we had different ideas of heaven, and I don't personally believe in hell for myself, and, you know, which was different from my husband. So I love that we can all, he goes, I said, I think when I get to heaven, St. Peter's going to open that book and look and go, yikes. I go, and then he's going to flip that page, and all of those dogs and cats I've saved over the year. And he's going to go, oh, okay. And I'm going to open the gates, and all of those dogs and kittens that I have rescued and saved and are going to be going. David goes, you don't believe that. I go, that's exactly how I believe. And I think God, you know, I told a girl who was struggling about my belief and my idea that she knew who Jeffrey Dahmer was. And I said, he was a sick guy. And he was murdered while he was in prison. And I said, and I think when he got to heaven, God says, you're a sick man and I love you. Come in. She goes, no. And I go, yeah. I don't think he would deny me any help because I'm a sick person. And I think he's going to say, you did the best you could, Marian. And thanks for saving those puppies. And David said he's going to be waiting for me with my fishing pole. So I think God's going to say, here you guys are.
That would be pretty cool.
It's going to be very
Marian,
cool.
Thank you so much. Thank you for just sharing your recovery story, your experience, your strength, and for being kind and nice, and for all the service that you do. And thank you for taking the time today to be on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Joe.
It was my pleasure. My pleasure. So just for everybody listening, please subscribe to our friends at thedailyponderables.com, your recovery source for inspiration and encouragement every day. A new episode of the Cup of Joe Show is released every Thursday at noon. Visit thecupofjoeshow.net, or you can listen to the show on your favorite podcast apps, Podbean, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the "the." Please like, follow, subscribe, and share because someone out there needs to hear this today. Thank you for listening, everybody.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's experience, strength, and hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to The Cup of Joe Show.